This is Nation Radio TV, the voice of the people.
My friends, after the debacle of the Syrian army, now same story in Central Africa. A handful of insurgents just clapped governmental forces. Here you can see the triumphal entry of M23 rebels into Goma, a city of 1 million inhabitants and the capital of North Kivu province, that they have just snatched from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Congolese army defending the city of Goma didn't just lose, it vanished.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
According to the latest news after capturing Goma, the M23 rebels are now pushing deep towards Bukavu, the capital of South Kivu province. The M23 rebels taught the DRC a masterclass in the art of war, and in the end forced thousands of governmental forces to either flee or surrender. So today we will break down how a small rebel force humiliated an entire nation. On the surface, it's just like any other African conflict. We have minerals, foreign mercenaries, and bystanding UN peacekeepers. The offensive by the M23 rebels have caused a humanitarian disaster, as hundreds of thousands of refugees, entire families have abandoned their homes.
This is Africa.
As always, there is a twist. The country of Rwanda isn't just supporting these M23 rebels. Professional Rwandan army soldiers are now fully embedded with the M23 units. Entire battalions of the Rwandan army have crossed the border of the DRC to storm the city of Goma. So this isn't just another rebel uprising in Africa. This is the official Rwandan invasion of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
The minerals, the money.
I don't know.
Truth be told, this ongoing war is already international, with the presence of thousands of soldiers from Burundi, South Africa, Tanzania, Malawi. Oh, and let's not forget about the infamous Romanian mercenaries. Don't worry, we'll break it all down. As a reminder, I highly recommend you to watch the first video I did on the topic, where I covered the entire context behind this war. If you're interested, the link is in the description below. I also had the opportunity to speak with people on the ground, so expect a pretty exclusive report. I gathered so much information that this video on Africa will be pretty long and girthy with content. As a matter of fact, I even got a DM from someone related to the M23 rebels. So the message said, Corneille Nangaa, current leader of the Alliance Fleuve Congo M23 movement, sends you a plane ticket plus takes care of your accommodation for a field report in the liberated zones.
Are you Chris?
Thank you, I appreciate the gesture, but I'm fine. Welcome to History Legends, and here are the latest news of the Rwanda-DRC war. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my videos have been targeted with limited or no ads. So make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters. Before we start talking about all the military operations, you have to know who are the belligerents in this war. On one hand, we have the M23 rebels, composed of ethnic Tutsis that live in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Although they are a minority in the DRC, they represent a sizable population in Rwanda. These M23 rebels also nicknamed themselves the Lions of Sarambwe. On the other hand, we have the FARDC, the Armed Forces of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Although it has always been known that the M23 rebels have been backed by Rwanda due to ethno-linguistic ties, in recent years, there was more and more proof of direct military intervention of Rwandan troops on Congolese soil. Here the ACLED declared, the Rwandan Defense Force deployed around 3,000 to 4,000 troops into the DRC to support the approximately 3,000 M23 fighters operating in North Kivu, while some intelligence sources believe the figure is far higher, with possibly more than 7,000 Rwandan soldiers operating in Congo. Is it me, or when an army is called Defense Force, they always end up on someone else's territory? Honestly, we don't know the actual number of M23 fighters, but according to this data, we see that nearly 60% of M23 troops are in fact Rwandan army soldiers. That's how entire battalions of the highly disciplined and well-equipped Rwandan army served tours of duty in the DRC. Meanwhile, Kagame, the president of Rwanda, doesn't seem to know his troops are operating in the DRC.
Does Rwanda currently have any troops at all in Eastern DRC?
I don't know.
You're the commander-in-chief.
Yeah, there are many things I don't know.
Right.
Over the years, the addition of this Rwandan contingent greatly increased the combat value of M23 fighters. As a matter of fact, M23 detachments are now even supported by Chinese Type 92 Yitian self-propelled short-range air defense systems. Same thing for the gear and equipment of the troops. Here on the left, you can see a Rwandan soldier with a Polish-made 762 MSBS Grot assault rifle. And on the right, an M23 fighter equipped with the Russian-made 762 AK-103 assault rifle mounted with a 40mm GP25 on-the-barrel grenade launcher. At this point in time, it's very hard to differentiate between a Rwandan army soldier and an M23 fighter. They have similar weapons, they both have the same helmets and bulletproof jackets. In comparison, I would say it's the governmental forces of the FRDC that actually look like a ragtag militia. The Congolese army, the FRDC, do benefit from a numerical advantage, but this is easily cancelled out by all the problems they have to face. Low salaries, bad equipment, corruption, and poor discipline. And that's exactly why the DRC hired foreign mercenaries, namely a Romanian contingent. For the most part, these men are former French Foreign Legion personnel, hired as instructors and weapons specialists to instruct Congolese army units. On the surface, they're just instructors, but in reality, I would say they're instructors with benefits. Because when push comes to shove, they don't hesitate to jump into battle. The reality is that the units of the FRDC are really in shambles. Sadly, it's nothing new. Here from 2012, the FRDC, a dilapidated army. The article mentioned corruption, underpaid soldiers, lack of basic equipment and training. Again in 2021, several officers of the DRC armed forces have been arrested for embezzling funds intended for soldiers. Actually, here's a story. There were these Romanian instructors. The Congolese battalion they had to train lined up in front of them. And they were shocked to see that many of these Congolese soldiers didn't even have boots. They were barefoot. And of course, none of them had body armor, even helmets. And of course, they didn't have battle belts either. They simply put the mags in their pockets. So the instructors started taking care of these guys and wanted to start with some physical training. That's when the Congolese soldiers admitted they had not eaten in 2 days. Allegedly, they had not been supplied in a long time, and their commander sold the remaining rations for his own personal profit. In the end, although forbidden, many soldiers take their AKs and end up setting up random checkpoints to ransom civilians, just so that they can eat. And that's in the best case scenario, because others just ransack and pillage entire villages. As you can see, sometimes there is a very thin line between governmental forces and the rebels.
This is Africa.
It's also important to mention that the FRDC often resort to local levies called the Wazalendo to beef up the strength of army detachments. However, it also happens that these Wazalendo groups go berserk and fighting erupts between them and the army. So in my last video, we analyzed the territorial expansion of the M23 movement between 2022 and 2024. On the map you can see in red, it's the territory controlled by the M23 rebels. We left off in March 2024, but then during the summer, the M23 launched a major offensive in the north towards Lake Edward, all the way to the town of Kirumba. That's also when we saw the start of peace talks between the DRC and Rwanda. Since the beginning of this military campaign, the political objective of the M23 movement was always Goma, the capital and main urban area of North Kivu province, home to over 1 million inhabitants. And it's probably higher by now due to all the refugees fleeing all the fighting. As you can see here, by June 2024, the western outskirts of Goma were now covered in tents and shanty towns. The M23 could have attacked directly towards Goma along the N2 road, but they were stopped by multiple strongholds and fortified bastions. The open and flat terrain made an attack in this direction very complicated, especially since detachments of Romanian mercenaries surveilled the entire sector with drones, and if they spotted an enemy concentration of forces, they would pound them with very precise mortar fire and 50 cal machine guns. That's how the command staff of the M23 maneuvered their forces and expanded their area of control outside Goma, which was made possible since their capture of the town of Rutshuru. Throughout the summer of 2024, the M23 rebels were regrouping forces for an offensive northwards towards Lake Edward. Despite a ceasefire agreement, in August 2024, forward elements of the M23 cleared the town of Ishasha, located on the Ugandan border, and forced 100 Congolese police officers to flee across the border. So the commanders of the M23 maneuvered their troops and launched this massive bypassing operation through very inhospitable lands. The Western Front consisted of countless forested hills, and they're very steep. But since the M23 is an infantry-heavy army, they could easily infiltrate enemy lines from one ridge to another. That's how the M23 made considerable gains in the Mweso district, as well as in the region of Masisi along the R529 road. During this push, the M23 took hold of the strategic mining town of Rubaya in May 2024. In these mines, we can find rare minerals such as coltan and tin, which are critical for electronics. According to the UN, between April and December 2024, the M23 rebel group has made $800 million in revenue related to coltan mining alone. Now this was a game changer. With more money, the M23 can start flirting with enemy commanders whose allegiance is only a matter of dollars. And this is especially dangerous considering that the DRC has trouble paying all its soldiers. You will notice that on each axis of progression of M23 forces lies some mine exploitation sites. The same way as during medieval times where knights went from besieging one castle to another, in the modern age, the rebels move from one mine to another. These minerals travel along this logistics line all the way towards Rwanda, via Mushaki, Kichanga, Tongo, and from there there's only one path across the jungle until they reach Katale, before reaching the border with Rwanda. So yeah, the economic miracle of Rwanda can mostly be explained due to all the minerals they got from the Congo.
He's obsessed with controlling the Kivu, the Eastern DRC, for reasons we all know, the minerals, the money.
I love gold!
I don't know.
From a logistics perspective, by capturing the town of Sake and Goma, the road to transport the minerals to Rwanda would be much faster. A direct 50 kilometers on paved roads instead of 125 kilometers across small jungle paths. As you can see, it was imperative to capture the town of Sake. That's how M23 detachments build so many forts on all the hilltops overlooking the city of Sake, which was effectively under siege. This also meant that Goma was de facto cut off from the rest of the DRC. It could only be resupplied by air or sea. You can clearly spot all these forts on satellite imagery. I mapped 14 of them right in front of Sake alone. There's this fort I call the BBL, because it's flat and all of a sudden there's a big bump. Honestly, this BBL is really well done. This trench bastion is so intricate. Deep trenches, multiple firing positions, backup positions, and this is only what is visible from above. There are another two forts on parallel ridges. There are also concealed communication trenches that link up with this other bastion I nicknamed the Eagle's Nest. This one has an outer ring, a second one in the middle, and the last one at the center. The M23 effectively built a multi-layered defensive system, all linked up by concealed communication trenches. And all these bastions can also mutually support each other. Together, this one forms like a trident with the Eagle's Nest at the center and three other forts at the tip. These trench bastions are so well built that artillery barely does anything to them. That's right, one shovel to rule them all. Only small detachments actually defend these forward outposts, so anyway artillery strikes would do little damage. Some more troops are positioned in the Eagle's Nest, but the majority of the fighters are lodged in some village at the rear. And you guessed it, the FRDC cannot shell these villages for humanitarian reasons, because of all the civilians that live there. If there's an attack, they all run back to the forts using these concealed trenches. Honestly, just looking at all these fortifications located on the steepest hills, an FRDC counteroffensive in this direction would be extremely complicated, if not impossible. And from a tactical level, the moment Congolese soldiers would get fired at from different angles, they would just all run back. Meanwhile, FARDC outposts are easy to spot, because most of them only consist of one trench going around the camp. That's it. You can see the tents where the soldiers live. They're not even protected. Now the morale of FARDC soldiers is also very low because from what I've heard, there's little to no rotation either. Congolese soldiers sometimes stay up to 6 months in these rudimentary forts, and good luck getting resupplied so close to the front. So many of the troops end up living in these forts with their entire families, women and children. As I stated earlier, there were peace talks between the DRC and Rwanda between July and September 2024. There was hope of a peaceful resolution. On the 12th of December, the ACLED declared, albeit fragile, peace agreements and ceasefires between the DRC and Rwanda will likely diminish overall levels of violence in the Great Lakes region in 2025. Haha, bliat, it will only get worse. 3 days later, on the 15th of December, the Angolan-mediated talks between the DRC and Rwanda broke down, since Rwandan President Paul Kagame didn't even attend the event. Within hours, fighting erupted once again across the entire region. The command staff of the M23 immediately resumed its offensive along Lake Edward and took control of Matembe on the 15th of December. It's really not a surprise. No fortifications were built by governmental forces apart from this random outpost. During this attack, M23 fighters surprised FARDC troops by storming their positions with captured T-55 tanks. 1 day later, the M23 captured the town of Ali Bongo. In this footage, you can see M23 fighters celebrating their quick victory with a traditional dance. And that's when knowing French gets very handy. It's the lingua franca from both sides, to which they mix a lot of Lingala or Kinyarwanda.
Merci, nous sommes le 16 décembre 2024. Nous sommes précisément à Vichumbilo. Comme vous le savez, la coalition gouvernementale a attaqué nos forces et maintenant, ils ont pris la poudre d'escampette. Ils ont fui. Alors maintenant, le commandant en place qui est là, bonjour mon major, vous allez vous présenter.
In this footage, essentially, they talk about all the countless pieces of military equipment they have captured from the FARDC, including entire crates of 82mm mortar shells. FARDC detachments sent to stop the M23 kept melting away. Everywhere, Congolese civilians were shocked to see their governmental forces in full retreat, abandoning them to the rebels without a fight.
Cowards! Our men flee the battlefield!
5 days later, on the 21st of December, another detachment of about 30 soldiers took control of the village of Bingi. From there, they were only 50 kilometers away from the large city of Butembo, home to over 150,000 inhabitants. In this propaganda video, we see Lieutenant Colonel William Ngoma, the spokesman of the M23 movement, showing around the villages they have recently captured. A couple days later, on the 28th of December, William Ngoma went back to the front and recorded all the equipment they captured from yet another FARDC base. We can see trucks, multiple mortars, heavy machine guns, a pile of AKs and countless crates of ammunition. That's where we can really ask ourselves about the combat value of FARDC units. In this case, they had everything available to defend the position. That's where we can think that maybe their commander was bribed. Additionally, in the video, the M23 show 33 Congolese army soldiers they have captured, on top of dozens of Wazalendo militiamen.
Aligné, main. Oh, wow, Aboudjou. Wazalendo. Ok. On peut, c'est le groupe des FDLR. Ok, ça ce sont des FDLR. Mais toi tu as quel âge? Il a 13 ans.
Still, due to their numerical advantage, eventually the arrival of FARDC reinforcements and Wazalendo militiamen in the north prevented the M23 from carrying on their offensive. All this seems to have been a diversion, because that's when the M23 shifted their axis of progression 100 kilometers to the south near Lake Kivu. January 2025. On the 4th of January, after days of heavy fighting, M23 forces took control of the village of Katale. As you can see on the map, it sits on a very strategic ridgeline. It was the last verrou or lock on the R529 road leading straight into the town of Masisi. In this video, you can see a rally point of an entire company worth of M23 soldiers. They seem very well organized. We see 4 trucks heading to the front, filled to the brim with about 12 riflemen each. The M23 Rebel Offensive, sponsored by Toyota. Disclaimer, for legal purposes, this is a joke. As you can see, perhaps these soldiers were actually professional Rwandan army military personnel. The M23 offensive was carefully planned because right after the fall of Katale, the town of Masisi was abandoned by Congolese army soldiers. The same day, M23 General Byamungu was spotted in the center of Masisi. The capture of Masisi was confirmed by Le Monde. Rwanda-backed M23 rebels seized key town in East DR Congo, and it was also confirmed by the spokesperson of the FRDC. After FRDC resistance collapsed in this region, it reported 100,000 civilians fled and hit the road. The general staff of the FRDC blamed their failures on what they claimed to be a never-ending flow of Rwandan soldiers crossing the border. New report confirms presence of nearly 4,000 Rwandan troops in DRC, with M23 units directly supervised by RDF Special Forces. That's 12% of the entire Rwandan Defense Force now deployed in the DRC. The success of the M23 offensive can be explained that most of the attacks are now launched by Rwandan soldiers. Meanwhile, M23 detachments are supported and supervised by Rwandan Special Forces. As a force multiplier, these guys are essential to keep the cohesion of this entire detachment, to lead the attack, but also to prevent a complete rout in defense. So I will tell you a typical scenario. You will have a detachment of special forces from the Rwandan army that will approach an FRDC bastion. Then they will provoke it by opening fire from all directions, and then they will fall to the ground. In response, all the Congolese soldiers in the fort rush to their AKs, machine guns, and fire back. The entire ridgeline lights up, a real hail of fire, until they run out of ammo. And often it's not very long considering most FRDC soldiers only have 1 or 2 mags in their pockets. And of course they have 0 fire control. And now here's the twist. When they run out of ammo, what do? They all abandon the fort and the M23 just walks in. Rwandan army soldiers will be rotated out and it's gonna be M23 fighters that will garrison all these captured positions. Fuck. Then it's pretty much rinse and repeat. And once again, the nightmare of M23 fighters is falling in an ambush laid out by the Romanian mercenaries. They will not retreat but respond with a combination of drones, very precise sniper fire, mortar strikes, and heavy machine gun suppression. In that case, it's a real turkey shoot, and the M23 will suffer heavy casualties, and it will take many months for them to rebuild a sizable force. With that being said, these Romanian operators are not the only professional soldiers to be feared. In one of these battles, the M23 reported that they faced Burundian forces and captured some of their weapons, including a rare 40mm Chinese Norinco LG4 revolver grenade launcher. That's right, Burundi is also involved in this war, because they're worried about the growing power of their northern neighbor, Rwanda. And naturally, they also fear a spillover of this entire conflict on their homeland. 15 battalions of Burundian soldiers are reportedly deployed in the DRC, and another one is preparing to reinforce this expeditionary force. So at the moment, we can estimate 7,500 Burundian soldiers deployed in the DRC. And that's huge, that's 30% of the entire armed forces of Burundi. At the same time, on the 6th of January, there was this video where Burundian soldiers complained about not having been paid for 7 months. Yeah, I'm sure their commander used all this money very wisely. Now it gets complicated. The Burundian army is not only fighting the M23 rebels, but also a Burundian insurgency group operating in the DRC called the Red Tabara. Overall, by the 2nd of January 2025, this post showed the pictures of 52 Burundian military personnel confirmed as KIA by funerals and burials. On the 23rd of January, news agency SOS Media Burundi stated, "Burundian military losses in Congo, a secret difficult to keep." They mentioned 81 Burundian soldiers who were injured during the fighting with the M23 on Congolese territory, and another 19 KIA. As a matter of fact, the biggest secret is the number of losses of Rwandan army personnel. More on that at the end of the video. Back to the map of military operations. The FARDC did manage to launch a counteroffensive out of Minova. but instead of pushing along the coastal road, they bypassed it along this ridgeline. For example, here we see Congolese soldiers that regained a hill near Bwerimana. On the 7th of January, the FARDC launched a counterattack towards Masisi with special forces and regained control of the village of Ngungu. The objective was to cut off the R529 road linking Masisi to Sake and kick the M23 out of the Rubaya mines. From an operational perspective, the Congolese army tried to push north along Lake Kivu to unblock the city of Sake. That was a great maneuver, and on paper that was the best thing to do. But fast forward 10 days, and by the 19th of January, the entire FARDC counteroffensive just crumbled. I personally think it's the arrival of additional Rwandan army battalions that tipped the balance. Another factor could be that a lot of these positions that were captured by FARDC special forces were handed over to Wazalendo militiamen or regular units with low morale, and due to a lack of discipline and cohesion, they simply abandoned all these positions. Within a few days, the M23 forces regained the initiative and went back on the attack. They captured Luzirandaka and pushed 18 kilometers all the way to Shanje. This also marked their entry into South Kivu province. From there, they could flank all Congolese army positions along Lake Kivu. 2 days later, FARDC units collapsed as M23 fighters pushed on the N2 road along Lake Kivu and captured the town of Minova. Then they advanced another 6 kilometers all the way to Kalungu. This was a disaster for the DRC. This battle was really a turning point because it essentially sealed the fate of Sake and of Goma. Now what was impressive is that the M23 forces not only managed to conquer territories, but to secure their holdings, they also had to learn how to quickly administer all these regions. The fall of Sake and Goma. If we zoom out, this is all the territory that the M23 controlled by the 21st of January 2025. Now with their southern flank secured, M23 forces started tightening their siege of Sake. That's when the first assault detachments descended upon Kimoka. This also meant the battle for the Goma pocket was beginning. The order of battle of the FARDC was approximately the following: 1,000 in Sake, 1,500 in Mubambiro, 500 near position between Sake and Goma nicknamed the Crater, and 3,000 spread out around Goma. To that you can add a reserve force of 10,000 soldiers sitting at the rear that could be supported by reinforcement of 2,000 from police units. In total, approximately 18,000 Congolese security forces against perhaps 2,000 to 3,000 M23 and Rwandan soldiers. But in reality, we can divide by 10 the actual combat value of the FARDC. In this pocket of Goma, there was also the remaining UN peacekeepers of the MONUSCO contingent. As you can see in this video, these UN troops are very professional and they're very well trained with many communication trenches and bunkers. The problem is that they're absolutely hated by the local population. More hated than the M23 rebels. As a matter of fact, whenever UN convoys go for a patrol, they kept getting rocks thrown at them as they never engage in actual fighting and have never done anything to prevent M23 rebels from gaining ground. In Goma, there were also the African allies of the DRC known as the SADC. Out of an authorized 5,000 military personnel, only 1,300 strong contingent made it to Goma, of which 750 South Africans, but also Tanzanian and Malawian soldiers. 5 companies of South Africans held the line right behind Sake and Bambiru, which they heavily fortified during the past year and a half. 2 other companies were positioned around the airport of Goma. This SADC force was equipped with numerous armored vehicles, like these ones belonging to the Tanzanian contingent. Between the 22nd and 23rd of January, heavy fighting erupted in Sake. In response, the FARDC carried out multiple airstrikes under the cheers of all the local population. Once again, there was hope. Most importantly, the well-fortified SADC and FARDC bases were meant as a forward operating base to prevent a breakthrough towards Goma. Soon enough, South African soldiers engaged the approaching M23 troops with intense machine gun fire, both from bunkers and armored vehicles. Even anti-aircraft weapons were utilized to repulse the main assault of M23 troops. Here we even see men of the South African National Defense Force firing RPGs at the enemy, while others pounded enemy assault detachments with mortars. This battle was clearly intense, as 14 South African, 2 Tanzanian and 3 Malawian soldiers were reported as KIA. The sacrifice of South African troops allowed countless civilians to flee from the rebels. In this video you can see Congolese soldiers defending their base, albeit in a very disorganized way. Had they been betrayed, sold out by their commanders? What we know is that everything collapsed on the 23rd of January, when some Congolese army units simply abandoned their fortified combat positions.
Again!
The M23 moved in, and that's how the South African companies got surrounded, and soon enough they found themselves out of ammunition.
A few moments later.
With the enemy closing in, the South Africans negotiated a ceasefire with the M23 commanders. Expecting the debacle of their allies, the Romanian mercenaries built a fortified outpost with many concealed firing positions and bunkers. The next line of defense stood 1,500 meters behind Bambiru, on a slightly elevated position overlooking flat open terrain. As you can see in this video, a frontal assault by the M23 would have turned into a turkey shoot. The same way Call of Duty veterans wipe out all the noobs on Christmas Day. I was shocked by the following footage. We see the remnants of FARDC units just sitting on the ridgeline. No organization whatsoever. Eventually, a tank came in reinforcement along the main road. Moments later, 2 tanks are recorded firing towards Sake in the distance, while hundreds of FARDC soldiers continue fleeing towards this ridgeline. In this other footage, we can see the point of view from behind the tanks. They're completely demoralized and the fighting has not even really started. There's no trench digging, nothing. Actually, where are their NCOs and officers to motivate the troops into launching a counterattack? The military commander of the North Kivu province went to the front to motivate all the troops. Governor of Congo's North Kivu province dies of his wounds in fighting with rebels.
Their general has fallen!
Meanwhile, Goma was brewing with unprecedented military activity. South African convoys were driving left and right. The objective could have been to create an armed fist to counterattack, unblock the South Africans in Bambiru, and kick out the M23 from Sake. This wasn't necessarily a bad plan, considering that all M23 soldiers left their fortified bastions and were now exposed in open terrain. The civilian population of Goma even escorted their beloved Kongoleskaya Armia all the way to the battlefield. That's when, on the 24th of January, M23 commanders and their Rwandan army allies closed the trap. As the ridgeline was being reinforced, M23 troops from Minova pushed up the peninsula and launched an amphibious operation on Lake Kivu using little boats and rafts. They only had 100 meters of water to cross, and that's how they achieved total surprise. They flanked the entire line of defense. They took control of these 2 hilltops with a direct line of fire on the ridgeline.
A devastating loss for the enemy!
From there must have been total chaos, as all the troops retreated to the next line of defense, right at the entry point of the western suburbs of Goma, between this crater and this other one called Lac Vert. Once again, the defenders benefited from some sort of advantage. The attackers would have to cross over 2,000 meters of flat, open terrain. Boom! Trap number 2! That's when entire battalions of Rwandan army soldiers marched across the jungle, all around Mount Nyiragongo, and fell on the right flank of this ultimate line of defense. From Rutoke, the M23 and Rwandan troops most likely stormed this hilltop and rained hell on these Congolese soldiers defending this military base. And that's how the M23 captured the last topographic feature that could have prevented them from entering Goma. That's probably when the MONUSCO contingent got ambushed, as this vehicle was geolocated right here on the map. Overall, it's a complete disaster on the western flank of Goma. Now, let's take a look at the northern sector. There, M23 forces pushed along the N2 road directly into the northern outskirts of Goma. On the map, we can see a fortified bastion on a hilltop near Kibati, with a secondary line of defense 300 meters behind. It was an ideal position since the defenders could overlook 8 kilometers of flat ground. But disaster struck once again. Entire Rwandan army units officially crossed the border with the DRC and flanked this new line of defense. Surprise was total. Reportedly, the Rwandan troops crossed somewhere in this sector near the border posts 12 and 13. The worst is that in July 2024, The senator of North Kivu went to visit that exact location, demanding it to be seriously reinforced by the army. From this moment on, it was a complete rout. Looking at all this evidence, I personally think up to 10,000 Rwandan army soldiers were involved in this operation. Otherwise, it's impossible to explain the collapse of the FARDC. The DRC's foreign minister said, "As I stand before you, an attack of unprecedented gravity is unfolding. More Rwandan troops have crossed the border post separating Goma and Rwanda, entering our territory in broad daylight in an open and deliberate violation of our national sovereignty. This is a frontal aggression, a declaration of war." As a result, tens of thousands of refugees fled towards the city center of Goma. Entire families abandoned their homes in fear of getting caught in the crossfire. Due to this chaos, many soldiers used this opportunity to loot and pillage. Remained the Helm's Deep of Goma, the international airport, which was reinforced and turned into a stronghold. It was defended by 2 companies of South African and Tanzanian soldiers, as well as some Romanian mercenaries. However, by the end of the 24th of January, the airport was almost cut off from the rest of the city. Actually, some governmental forces tried to launch a counterattack.
Il est venu jusque dans l'aéroport international de Goma. Ça brûle, ça brûle, ça brûle. Donc nous sommes déterminés aujourd'hui pour sauver notre pays. Nous allons libérer la République.
But without fire support or discipline, they quickly fell back. Most FARDC commanding officers abandoned their men and fled by boat towards Bukavu. In this one, local residents helped a group of Congolese soldiers that got cut off to disguise themselves as civilians by throwing them clothes. Effectively, the army of FARDC soldiers defending the capital of North Kivu simply vanished. We enter the final chapter of the Battle of Goma on the night of January 25th to the 26th. Columns of FARDC troops were withdrawing from their positions near the Rwandan border. We know this because in the video it says Kivu Ceramica, and this factory is located 1 kilometer away from the DRC-Rwanda border. Later on January 26, M23 commanders ordered all remaining FARDC soldiers to surrender to UN peacekeepers. Here an entire group of men entered the Uruguayan compound with their hands in the air. By the 27th of January, the FARDC and Wazalendo militia still held some parts of the city. They even managed to counterattack and reclaim the National Broadcaster building. However, later that day, over 1,200 Congolese soldiers located at the airport surrendered, allowing the M23 to take control of it. In this footage, you can see the lines of Sarambwe at the gate of Goma's International Airport, a symbol of their victory on the DRC. By nightfall, Goma had fallen to the M23 and Rwandan forces, although dispersed firefights still erupted until January 30th. All across Goma, groups of FARDC held their weapons above their heads and surrendered to Rwandan border guards. Here, a platoon of Congolese soldiers fled across the border in Rwanda to surrender. In this one, an entire football stadium was filled with POWs, estimated between 2,500 and 4,000. In the end, thousands of these prisoners were now being transported to the rear. As part of the aftermath, M23 fighters and Rwandan soldiers started occupying the city as they were surrounded by massive crowds. Moments later, Willy Ngoma, the spokesman of the M23 movement, made his triumphal entry into the capital of North Kivu. M23 troops also got their hands on enormous quantities of military equipment and ammunition. Now what happened to our Romanian mercenaries? While those that could fled on their own from the airport, about 50 to 100 men. The others probably negotiated their surrender with the Rwandan army in exchange of some dollars. That's how the M23 accepted the rendition of 288 Romanian mercenaries. And of course, the M23 made sure to turn the surrender into an entire spectacle.
Move, move, quickly, quickly. Jump, jump, quickly, quickly, quickly. Hey, hey, quickly, 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 quickly.
The Romanians were then brought across the border in Rwanda, from where they were taken by bus towards the capital of Rwanda, Kigali. Apparently, during this event, they were very well treated. They got extra food, cigarettes, and overall spoke positively of Rwandan soldiers, stating that they were very professional and disciplined. In the end, the Romanian mercenaries were allowed to fly back from Kigali all the way to Romania. But of course, that's not the end of the DRC-Rwanda war. On the 29th of January, Bloomberg reported Angolan president calls on Rwandan troops to leave Congo. Felix Tshisekedi calls for mobilization, response underway. In the south, in Bukavu, the local population is preparing for battle from the advancing M23 troops, and any able-bodied man is drafted into the military. On the 3rd of February, the political wing of the M23 movement announced a humanitarian ceasefire. At the same time, entire convoys of Rwandan military personnel entered Goma. It's not a surprise a lot of troops are needed to secure and administer all this territory, especially after numerous Wazalendo uprisings and ambushes on M23 troops. Another question that can be asked is how long can the Rwandan Defense Force sustain this battle of attrition? In Kigali, the capital of Rwanda, satellite imagery of one military cemetery indicated an additional 600 graves that have been dug since the restart of the M23 offensive, especially since President Kagame even told the army in his end-of-year address, "May your sacrifices always be recognized and rewarded." Very strange for a country supposedly not involved in this war.
I don't know.
And on top of that, we have to consider that many Rwandan army privates are buried where they fall in Congo. According to the latest news, despite an attempt to a ceasefire, M23 forces are now continuing their offensive towards Bukavu, the capital of South Kivu. Meanwhile, the FARDC are preparing for the counter-offensive. However, like we've seen, they suffer from many problems that cannot be resolved overnight. Recently, a scandal erupted blaming some Congolese army troops for pillaging entire villages near Bukavu. Currently, they're trying to increase the size of their army with a major recruitment campaign. While the FARDC rebuild their ranks, the DRC's allies have come to help. An additional 1,000 soldiers from Uganda were sent to Butembo on the northern front, while it was announced that a 16th Burundian battalion has also arrived in the Congo. It's unclear to know where this war will lead, but we're all aware that the resource curse is real, and the minerals in the DRC bring too much wealth for peaceful resolution to this conflict. Who knows, maybe the Democratic Republic of the Congo will resort to hiring thousands of Colombian mercenaries to restore their territorial integrity. They have renowned expertise in jungle warfare, counterinsurgency tactics, and many of them speak French from their time in the French Foreign Legion.
This is Nation Radio TV, the voice of the people.